September 30th, 1955. James Dean is driving a tiny silver Porsche through Central California. The car is a Porsche 55 O Spyder. Chassis number 55 O-0055. Dean calls it Little Bastard. In a few seconds, it will become one of the most famous cars in American history. At an intersection near Shalem, a Ford turns across Dean's path. The Porsche slams into it. Dean is killed. He is 24 years old. But according to the story that develops afterward, Little Bastard isn't finished. People who supposedly used parts from Dean's Porsche crash their own cars. A man trying to steal a piece of the wreck is allegedly injured. A garage storing it mysteriously catches fire. The mangled Porsche travels around America as a highway safety exhibit. And then, 5 years after Dean dies, something seemingly impossible happens. Little Bastard is supposedly being transported back to California. According to the most famous version of the story, the wreck is placed inside sealed transport. It arrives. The seal hasn't been broken. They open it. The Porsche is gone. No wreck, no explanation. And more than 6 decades later, the remains of James Dean's Porsche have never been definitively recovered. It's one of the strangest mysteries in automotive history. Except there's a problem. When researchers began checking the story, some of its most famous details couldn't be verified. Others appear to be wrong, and many of them lead back to the same man. A man who understood better than almost anyone how to turn a car into a celebrity. And if some historians are right, we've spent more than 60 years trying to solve the wrong mystery. Because the question may not be, where did James Dean's Porsche go? The question may be, what exactly disappeared? Before we can answer that, we need to go back to the 9 days James Dean actually owned Little Bastard. Dean wasn't simply an actor posing with sports cars, he raced them. Earlier in 1955, the insurance company declared Little Bastard a total loss. Eventually, the wreck was purchased by Dr. William Eschrick, a physician and racing enthusiast. Eschrick wasn't interested in preserving a shrine to James Dean. He wanted racing parts. Despite the catastrophic crash, Little Bastard still contained valuable Porsche competition components. Eschrich removed the Porsche's 4-cam engine and installed it in his Lotus 9 race car. Other components were separated from the wreck as well. This matters, because almost immediately after Dean's death, Porsche 550-0055 stopped existing as one complete object. Its components began going in different directions. Only afterward did what remained of the wreck become associated with George Barris. Barris was a brilliant custom car builder and promoter. His shop would become associated with some of Hollywood's most recognizable vehicles, including the television Batmobile. And Barris understood the cultural value of James Dean's wreck. The mangled remains could do something a photograph couldn't. People could stand directly in front of the car in which James Dean died. The wreck began appearing at traffic safety exhibitions. The message was supposed to be educational. Drive recklessly, and this can happen to you. But another story gradually became attached to the wreck. Little Bastard wasn't merely dangerous, it was cursed. And this is where things get fascinating, because some of the cursed stories begin with real events. Dr. Eschrick had taken Dean's engine. Another racer, Troy McHenry, had reportedly obtained other Porsche components. In 1956, both men were involved in racing accidents. McHenry was killed. Eschrick survived. The legend practically writes itself. 2 men use parts from James Dean's Porsche. Both crash, one dies. The curse has begun. Except when researchers examined McHenry's fatal crash, they found a problem. The mechanical failure associated with the accident wasn't caused by a component taken from Dean's Porsche. A genuine death became connected to Little Bastard in a way the evidence didn't support. And that wouldn't be the last time. Another story claimed someone tried to steal the Porsche's steering wheel and broke his arm. Another said a thief attempting to take the bloodstained seat was injured. The wreck supposedly fell from a display and broke a man's hip. A truck carrying it supposedly crashed. People around Little Bastard seemed to keep getting hurt. Or at least, that's how the story was told. And there was one incident that really was documented. In March 1959, Little Bastard was being stored in Fresno before another exhibition. A fire broke out. This became one of the eeriest pieces of the curse. The garage burns. Other cars are supposedly destroyed. Yet James Dean's Porsche survives. Almost as if the car can't be killed. But contemporary reporting tells a less dramatic story. The fire scorched Little Bastard's paint and damaged 2 tires. Nobody was injured. Other cars stored nearby weren't destroyed. Something really happened. Then the legend improved it. And once you notice that pattern, a different mystery starts emerging. Who kept telling these stories? Again and again, the trail leads back to George Barris. Decades later, Porsche historian Lee Raskin began investigating Little Bastard's history. And the deeper he looked into the famous curse, the more pieces of it started falling apart. But the biggest problem wasn't the curse, it was the wreck itself. Think about what we've established. James Dean crashes Porsche 550-0055. The insurance company totals it. Dr. William Eschrich buys it. He removes the engine. Other components are separated from the car. Then the remaining wreck becomes a traveling attraction. That means the object thousands of people later saw wasn't an untouched wreck preserved exactly as it left the crash scene. And researchers disagree about exactly what remained. Accounts describe George Barris and his crew adding aluminum bodywork to the damaged remains so the display looked more like the destroyed Porsche. Lee Raskin's research goes further. He has raised the possibility that the original badly damaged chassis may have been discarded after its valuable components were removed, and that the object later exhibited as Little Bastard was substantially reconstructed. That's a theory. It has not been definitively proven. And it's important not to turn skepticism about one legend into another legend, but it creates an enormous problem for the conventional story. What exactly was touring America? How much of it was Porsche 550-0055? How much had been reconstructed? And when people stood in front of James Dean's death car, what exactly were they looking at? Keep that question in mind, because now we reach 1960. Little Bastard had reportedly been appearing at a safety exhibition in Florida. Afterward, the wreck was supposed to return to Barris in California. According to the most famous version of the story, it was placed inside a sealed railroad boxcar. The shipment travels across the country. It arrives in Los Angeles. The seal supposedly remains intact. They open the car. Little Bastard has vanished. Imagine trying to steal a mangled automobile from a sealed railroad car without breaking the seal. It sounds impossible, which is exactly why the story became so powerful. The cursed Porsche had survived crashes. It had survived fire. And now it had simply disappeared. Except there's another problem. The spectacular account of the disappearance comes largely from George Barris, the same man associated with many of the cursed stories researchers later struggled to substantiate. And accounts of the disappearance aren't perfectly consistent. Some versions describe a railroad boxcar. Other retellings describe the transportation differently. There is no known photograph showing Little Bastard sitting inside that sealed boxcar immediately before departure. No dramatic police investigation ever solved the supposed theft, and the remains have never definitively surfaced. None of that proves Barris fabricated the disappearance, but it means the story rests on much shakier ground than the legend suggests. And now, combine that with the earlier question. If the original wreck had already been stripped, if portions had been reconstructed, and if researchers aren't certain exactly what remained of chassis 550-0055, then what exactly disappeared in 1960? Maybe someone stole it, maybe it was destroyed, maybe it still exists somewhere, but there's another possibility. Maybe the reason nobody can find the object described in the legend is that we're searching for something that didn't exist in quite the form the legend remembers. And strangely enough, while people searched for the missing wreck, pieces of the real Porsche were never entirely lost. Little Bastard had been broken apart almost immediately after Dean's death, and unlike the touring wreck, some of those components have traceable histories. One of the most important is the original 4-speed transaxle, serial number 10046. This wasn't something someone claimed had come from Dean's Porsche decades later. Its provenance could be researched. Experts identified it as the transmission from chassis 550-0055, the real Little Bastard. Decades after Dean's death, that transmission appeared for auction. Think about how strange that is. The wreck millions of people had heard about was missing, but part of the actual car was sitting there with a serial number, and bidders wanted it. The price climbed past $100,000, then $200,000, then $300,000. Bidding reportedly reached approximately $382,000 for the transmission from a wrecked Porsche. Except, of course, nobody was really bidding on a transmission. They were bidding on the story, and the person who bought it couldn't have been more appropriate. Zach Bagans, the paranormal investigator and host of Ghost Adventures. Bagans operates the Haunted Museum in Las Vegas, so after decades of people arguing about whether James Dean's Porsche really was cursed, An authenticated piece of the actual car ended up with a man whose business is the paranormal. It's a perfect final chapter, but it also exposes something important about Little Bastard. There are really two cars in this story. The first is Porsche 55 0-0055. That car unquestionably existed. Porsche built it, James Dean bought it, he drove it, he crashed it. Dr. Eschrich bought the wreck. Its valuable components were separated. Some of those components survived. That's history. Then there's the second Little Bastard, the car that supposedly injured thieves, transferred a curse through its parts, survived mysterious fires, injured people at exhibitions, and finally vanished impossibly from sealed transport. That's the legend. And over 70 years, the boundary between those two cars became remarkably difficult to see. George Barris was an extraordinary promoter. James Dean was the perfect subject. Young, famous, dead at 24, and killed in a tiny silver racing Porsche with the ominous nickname Little Bastard. The story almost demanded a mythology. Every coincidence added another chapter. A racer dies after acquiring Porsche parts. The curse. A fire breaks out near the wreck. The curse. The display disappears. The curse. And once the story became famous enough, people stopped asking where each claim originally came from. That's why the disappearance is still fascinating, because we genuinely don't know the ultimate fate of every remaining piece of chassis 55-0-0055. Maybe some part of the wreck is hidden in a private collection. Maybe it was quietly destroyed. Maybe someone, somewhere, knows exactly what happened. But Lee Raskin's research suggests an even stranger possibility. For decades we've been asking, where did James Dean's Porsche go? Maybe that's the wrong question. Perhaps we should be asking, how much of James Dean's Porsche was left by the time Little Bastard supposedly disappeared? Because the deeper you dig into this story, the less it resembles a supernatural mystery. And the more it becomes a story about something just as fascinating. How legends are manufactured. A real Porsche became a wreck. The wreck became an attraction. The attraction became a curse. And the curse became more famous than the car itself. More than 70 years after James Dean died, Little Bastard still hasn't disappeared. Not really. It's just no longer a car. It's a legend. And legends are considerably harder to destroy. If you enjoy unbelievable true stories behind extraordinary cars, subscribe to the Rapid Vehicles YouTube channel. And visit rapidvehicles.com for more automotive stories, collectibles, and die-cast cars. Because sometimes the strangest thing about a legendary car isn't what happened to it. It's what everyone came to believe happened to it.